Okay, we're getting down to it. Coming in at number 3. We all knew this book was going to be on this list, right? I mean, who else out there? I mean, I feel like, okay, let me back up. Let me try this whole section again because I am failing. Hi everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my top 10 books from 2023. So it is time to talk about my favorites from the year. So I went through all the books that I read, looked at all my 5 stars, and kind of narrowed them down to a top 10. These are pretty interchangeable. I do have them in an order, but I love them all so much that like there's a clear winner, but beyond that, it's pretty, these were all just kind of great. So, like I said, I have a top 10 for you. So we will start with number 10 and go to number 1 and talk about the books that I just loved this year. So let's dive in. Coming in at number 10 is the only one on this list that I don't actually own, and that is The Charm Offensive. And this book was one of those books that I hit it at the right time. I was going through this phase. I had just watched the movie adaptation of Red, White, and Royal Blue, loved it, and was really going through this phase of all of the male-male romances that I could think of that were kind of similar. I want to say that I read this in like maybe August or something for like a readathon when I was really in the contemporary romance vibe during that time. And this just like hit perfectly. I want to say I read it end of August, beginning of September maybe. And this one was just so good, which I'm not really surprised about because this author wrote one of my favorite books, like one of my favorite Christmas books, Kiss Her Once for Me, which I had read last Christmas and just utterly loved. So the fact that this was another book by this author, and I'm pretty sure those are the only 2 books out right now by this author. I believe there's one coming out next year. But at this time, I've read everything by this author and just loved it so much. And this one, again, right time. This book follows our main 2 characters, Charlie and Dev, and it takes place on a like bachelor style dating show, but it's all about like Prince Charming, and it leans very heavily into the fairy tale life. So Dev is a producer, maybe is like his official title, but his job is basically to be in charge of all of the women on the show. So they have a man who comes in as like a Prince Charming type, and then they have all of the women who are the contestants or options for this man to fall in love with. And so his job has always been to be in charge of these women. And so this time around, we have a guy named Charlie who is on the show, and he is on the show for lots of different reasons. He's trying to kickstart his career again. He's had some issues in the past, and he's hoping that this will be kind of the thing that gets it back in motion. So does his producer or his manager. And so he's kind of hard to work with because Charlie suffers from anxiety. So he gets really, really bad panic attacks. And the guy that's usually in charge of the Prince Charmings on the show is just, he can't make it work. So the head honcho on the show basically assigns Dev to be the handler, if you will, of the Prince Charming. And so he and Charlie become really, really close. You also have like Dev is working through some stuff because he suffers from some pretty bad depression. And so he can go through episodes where he just doesn't leave his bed. And so you have these 2 people who are like trying to figure out their own stuff, but also some of them are trying to figure out their identity, and you've got a lot of elements going on in this story. So it's quite a lot more than just a romance, but I loved this one. I loved the characters. I love this author's writing. Alison Cochrane has an amazing way of writing characters. There's always amazing representation in her books from the 2 that I have read, and I just really enjoy her writing, and there's always way more substance to the stories. So this one definitely was up there just because my enjoyment of it was so high. Coming in at number 9 is King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair, which is the first in the Adrienne and Iseult series. I loved this one. I read it in October as part of my like vampire romance vlog, where I was trying out a bunch of books that dealt with vampires, which is not my favorite thing to read about. And I think that's why this one worked so well, because I went in, I talked about this a little bit in my disappointments and surprises video, but I went into this book And this book was already at a disadvantage for a couple of reasons. One, you have the whole vampire thing, which I'm already wasn't excited about. But I also had read something previously by this author, the first in her Hades and Persephone series, and it didn't really work for me. So I was worried going into this one that it was her writing style, and maybe it was just the Hades and Persephone series that didn't work, or maybe it was her writing as a whole. Turns out I was wrong, and it was not her writing as a whole. It was just that series that didn't work. So this one was really shocking and really just kind of took over my soul, if you will, because the characters in this really came to life from the front page. Isolde, it's all pretty much, if I can remember correctly, is in Isolde's perspective, and she is like a badass. She is ready to fight whatever she needs to. From page 1, you have her and this guard that she kind of had like a fling with, and his opinions about her because she's a woman, and her standing up for her beliefs. And already from the get-go, she's like not gonna let anyone talk badly about her. So you have that. You've got her and Adrian's relationship throughout this book as she fights against kind of this hate to love situation. She also learns more about him and the vampires because they have a very bad rap in this world. And of course, there's way more to the story than she has been told. So this book, I kind of talked a little bit about it, but this book follows Adrian and Isolde, and Adrian's a vampire, and he comes from a bunch of vampires that are basically taking over the world, is the best, or this world is the best way I can describe it. And Isolde's father has decided not to fight it, because if he fights it, then this army will completely destroy their people. But if he kind of goes along with it, then he can protect his people. So he does that, and he creates this meeting with him and Adrian, who is the king of the vampires. And Adrian's only request is that he have Isolde to marry. So she agrees to it because she's like, this is what's going to save my people, even if I hate every second of it, even if he kills me, I'm going to kill him before he can kill me, is her kind of goal going into this. But also, like, it'll protect my people because it will create this bond and this bargain between my dad and this guy. So she goes along with it, and then of course it's their relationship. Like I said, there's way more to it. What she thinks she knows about vampires is all wrong, and that kind of stuff. Also, it's not super gory. Like, yes, there are moments that are more gory than not because you do deal with vampires. It is set during like kind of a wartime, but it's not as gory as I expected, and there's not as much blood play when it comes to the sex scenes that I thought there was going to be, and that's what I was most worried about going into this book, and that was not a problem. So was very grateful for that and loved it, and it really just kind of took over my soul. I couldn't stop reading it, and now I just want to continue the series because I think it's so good and I love the writing in the series. So this author has definitely won me back with this series, and I'm willing to try some more things of hers, just maybe not any of her Hades and Persephone stuff, but this one worked perfectly. The next one, coming in at number 8, is Fortuna Sworn by KJ Sutton, which is kind of a stand-in for the series, but this is one that I read near the beginning of the year. It is part of the kickoff, if you will, of me discovering fantasy romance. I mean, like, I knew I always loved fantasy romance because I love romance, but I really kind of dived into that this year, and this one was kind of one of the beginnings of this. I knew I was going to like it going in, but I became kind of obsessed with this one. It's definitely, I wouldn't say maybe marketed, but I've heard people who have read this say that if you like the ACOTAR series, that you will enjoy this one. And I agree, it definitely has the same vibes as the ACOTAR series, especially the first book. There's a lot of plot stuff, especially at the end of the first ACOTAR book, that is very similar to this book. But it's a fascinating world, and I have really, really enjoyed the series. I've read the first 3 so far. So this one's my favorite just because it kind of kicked off the world, but I did really enjoy the second book as well. So the second one could maybe stand in as my favorite. It kind of switches back and forth. But this series follows our main character, Fortuna Sworn, who is a nightmare. And basically what that means is that she has the ability to, if she can, when she touches someone, figure out what their biggest fear is and use it against them. So she's the last nightmare out there. And so the book starts with her brother having been missing for 2 years, and she is not convinced that he's dead. Everyone else around her is convinced that he is dead and like something terrible happened, but it's time to move on. And she is convinced that he is still living and wants to figure out what's going on. So at the beginning of the book, she is approached by this guy who is a Seelie Fae. I can't remember if it's Unseelie or Seelie. They're both courts are in here, and I can never remember which one's which. But she's approached by a Fae who basically says, like, I can help you figure out what happened to your brother. Like, I know some stuff, but in order for me to do that, you have to marry me. And she's like, okay, fine. And so they get married, and she's brought to the court, and it goes from there. I love it. Fortuna is a very, very flawed main character. She drives me nuts half the time because half of her decisions, I go, why would you ever make that decision? That was wrong. But you kind of see her grow over the course of these books. There's a lot of fantastical elements in this, especially with her. She kind of has this, her own ability to create like this dreamscape within her own mind. And that's a very fascinating part of the story. And there's just a lot of this that I really enjoy. Plus the romance in here is absolutely amazing. It's super, super slow burn like this first book. I'm not really sure a whole lot happens, but the connection between the characters that I'm shipping her with, I think is amazing. And then of course you've got some other options as the series continues, and I'm never quite sure where the author is going. Like, it could literally go anywhere. Every time I think I figure it out, something happens. So this one is just really, really good. It's a good first step. It's super short, so the rest of her books are like twice the length, 3 times the length. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger, so you do kind of have to invest in this series, but I think it's worth it. I loved it. This is such a good book. Okay, coming in at number 7 is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. And this one is one that I just loved. I read it at the beginning of this year in my very first vlog of the year, where I read a bunch of books that I wish I had read the year previously and just didn't make time for. And so I read this one because I have this beautiful Fairylit edition that came in one of the Fairylit boxes. I had pre-ordered and received the special Fairylit edition of the second book in the series, so I figured I really needed to read it to make sure that it actually was worth buying all the special editions. It is a trilogy, so it's complete now. I haven't read the third one, and I really need to, but this one just kind of surprised me by how much I enjoyed it. I went in with like no expectations of this, and it just kind of became amazing. This book and this series follows our main character, Evangeline Fox, and in this book, she basically goes to this fate, who is the fate of broken hearts. She is convinced that the person that she is in love with, who was set to marry somebody else, is not marrying that person of their free will. So she's like, there's something that's not right here. And so she goes to this fate to basically like stop the wedding, which he agrees to do if she does a few favors for him. I think there's 3 favors, and it all has to do with like kissing someone, because there's a whole mythology around him, and if he kisses someone, they die. So you've got that story, which sounds ridiculous on the surface, but it's just like barely scratches the surface of what this story is. It just keeps going. There's so much mythology within this world. There's so many stories that actually turn out to be true. There's a lot of like history with like a royal family that has been buried for a while, like their name has been buried, and there's so much to this world that synopsis doesn't really tell you what the story's about, but it's the best synopsis that anyone can really give. And that's why I think I went into this with like no expectations, and then it became this wide-ranging story that turned out to be utterly amazing. So I loved it. I thought it was amazing, and it snuck its way onto this list because it's still, I think, still very highly of this book, and especially the fact that this book was read in the very first month of the year, and I still can remember a lot of the story and a lot of this world, and just the feelings I had reading it. I could not put it down. So yeah, this one definitely deserves to be on this list. Coming in at number 6 is another book that I read in that same vlog that Once Upon a Broken Heart I mentioned was in, and that is Our Violent Ends by Chloe Gong. This is another one that completely took me by surprise because it's the second in a duology by this author, which is a kind of reimagining of the Romeo and Juliet story. We have our main 2 characters, Roma and Juliet, it takes place in like 20s Shanghai. And these two characters are the children of two rival gangs in Shanghai who are always at each other's throats. And the first book starts with a bunch of gang members basically dying, and they each think it's the other person, the other gang, until these two kind of connect and realize that this is happening to both of them. So they end up secretly working together to kind of figure out what's happening, because there's a lot more to the story than just that. There's some turf war. This takes place there's like during, I can't remember exactly when in history it takes place, like there's a war going on, there's some conversation about communists coming in and kind of taking over. There's a lot of stuff that goes on, and the second book just continues. So the first book was good. I mean, I enjoyed it. I gave it 3 stars. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. It was very middle of the road. So I almost didn't pick this one up. But something told me it's just a duology. It did kind of have a cliffhanger, and I was curious where the story was going. So I was curious enough that I wanted to pick up the second one. It was just like not at the top of my radar, but because I was talking about it and I just decided, you know, let's give it a shot. You know, why not? And it became amazing. I fell head over heels very, very quickly for these characters. These are YA books. I mean, the characters in these books are like teenagers, so they're super young, but like these are violent books because they do take place between two gangs that are very violent towards each other. So it does not steer clear from the bloodshed and the war and things like that. So it is, I wouldn't say super gruesome, but it definitely is very violent. So just kind of be wary of that going in. But I still really enjoyed these characters. I still fell head over heels in love. And with this book, this one got 5 stars. So it's kind of amazing that the first book only got 3 and the second one got 5. Like, I don't know if I just paid attention to the world more, or I already knew the characters, so it was really easy to dive into this one, or the romance was just better in my opinion in this one. I don't know. It was just mwah, chef's kiss, amazing. I loved it. I still think about it. I've now invested in other books by this author because I loved her writing so much, and I definitely want to continue and see what other things this author has in store. But I loved it. I loved it. Okay, coming in at number 5. So this one is one that I've like moved around a bunch. It was lower on this list, and then I realized it needed to go higher. And honestly, it might still need to go a little bit higher, but I'm going to leave it at number 5. And that is Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, which is the second book in the From Blood and Ash series by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I'm saying this book specifically because while I love the series, the second one's my favorite. Like, out of the 3 that I've read so far, I love this one. And I think the reason I love this one is because it has the most romance in it. So this world, let me explain to you what this world's about if you don't know, because this is a series that I feel like is heavily loved with fantasy readers. The first book in this series, we follow our main character Poppy, who is the maiden. And basically what that means is, in this world, the maiden is thought of as like this perfect, pure person who is kind of put up on a pedestal, and she is going to be given to the gods, whatever that means. She's not really sure what that means. So she is very like hesitant about a lot of stuff, but she is not allowed to be seen by people, so she always wears a veil. She always has to wear white. She is not allowed to like experience a lot of emotions like happiness and pleasure and things like that. So she's very much sheltered, but is a captive in her own right. And so the book really starts when she ends up getting a new bodyguard named Hank. So that's kind of what the first book is about. And then of course it just kind of stems beyond that. It's so much more. But what I liked about this one, which I might liked a little bit more than the first one, is, well, the first one was amazing and I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. This one was the same way, but even more. Like I said, the romance was a bigger point. I mean, the romance was a big part of the first book, don't get me wrong, but the romance was a bigger part of this book, and they kind of share their feelings via fighting and sarcasm. So I loved reading the scenes. Anytime they were together in a scene, I loved it. But you also got a lot of these scenes where you got a lot of world building in this world, or in this book. You got a lot of chunks where she is learning about the world because she may not know some stuff. So you were learning about it with her. And so there's a lot of moments that it's just fascinating to see this author kind of expand the world that she has created in the first book. And then again, all of the moments that you see between our main two characters is everything I wanted. And then of course the third one is just as great. So that does continue, but like the second one so far is definitely my favorite, which is why this one is in this spot. I mean, also I didn't read the first one this year. I read the second and third one, but still, the second one, my favorite in the series, and it definitely needs to be on this list because I still think very highly of it. I tabbed the crap out of it. I don't know if you can see it because of the design. I have the Fairy Loot editions of the first 3 books in the series. So there is tabs like all over it, but the design on the side doesn't really show. But I tabbed the crap out of this book and I loved it. I loved them. I loved them. Then coming in at number 4 is It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. I love this book. I'm looking at my list and I'm realizing this is a very fantasy heavy like list, but this is one of the contemporaries that made it on this list. And when I tell you, this one got me out of like almost a reading slump. It really did. I mean, this one was one that I don't know, like there was just something about it that told me I needed to try it. I'd read something else by this author earlier this year. I think it was earlier this year in the summer that just, it didn't really hit right. I went in with too high expectations, I think, and the writing was just kind of okay. Also, it was half the size of this book. Like, this is a pretty chunky book when it comes to a contemporary romance. There's quite a few things that I had against this book as far as my personal reading taste goes. Like I said, I had read something by this author before and it hadn't worked. The synopsis itself wasn't the most interesting. It was definitely compared to Schitt's Creek. The character of Alexis in Schitt's Creek is very similar to our main character Piper in this book, which now that I've actually started watching Schitt's Creek, I agree with. And it definitely was not like the vibe. It's in a fisher kind of town, like a fisherman town, which again, not my vibe. There was just a few things that were like, I wasn't feeling it. But I went into this one because it happened one summer. It took place during the summer. And so I felt like I needed to read it during the summer. And I just had heard some good things about it. And I just wanted to give it a try. So I did. I randomly got the audiobook from my library and decided to give it a try. And it took my heart and soul from like almost the get-go. Like, yes, the character of Piper drove me nuts, but once we saw her start to change a little bit and see her personality a little bit more, like there was a few things going on that I loved her. I loved their relationship. It was very, very adult. He was very open about a lot of stuff. And so was she. Like, if there was ever an issue, she would shut down. And he was like, nope, we're going to talk about this like adults and we're going to come to a solution. And they would. And I loved that about them because of that romance. Because, they were both fighting for each other while also like dealing with a lot of stuff themselves. Because they both come with quite a lot of baggage in this world. And so I loved them. I loved their romance. I loved the writing of it. Like, everything about this was perfect. So I can't wait to get to the second book, hopefully next year, which follows her sister. And I really enjoyed this one so much that I have high hopes for that one. And I'm definitely willing to give other books by Tessa Bailey a try because this one just worked so well. All right, coming in at number 3 is a book that a lot of people should not be surprised is on my favorites of all time list. Maybe surprised it's so low. I know, number 3, pretty low. But this one is probably a book that is on everyone's favorites list, and that, of course, is Fourth Ring by Rebecca Yarros. Read this in June, loved it, fell head over heels in love with the characters. Definitely was on the hype train for this book, tabbed the ever-loving daylights out of it, and I'm very excited to get to the second one whenever the mood strikes for that one. But this book, which I feel like everybody has read at this point, but if you haven't, it follows our main character Violet, who is basically thrust into this world that she didn't ask for. So in the world of this book is a college, and this college has kind of like 4 sections, and you go for one of these, and it's basically to help everybody out. She's always thought that she was going to be a scribe, which is basically like a glorified librarian, history keeper, that kind of person. And because she has a chronic illness and she's considered pretty weak, so she's not thought of any other path to go down. Plus her dad was a scribe and she always wanted to be one like her dad. Her mother, who is a pretty high like general in this army, has very different opinions and makes her try go to the writer quadrant, which is basically like the soldiers in this world. And so she's forced to go into this quadrant and basically fight for her life. In this quadrant, like I said, it's like the soldiers of the world. There are dragons, and that's why they're called riders, because you are paired with a dragon. And in this world, when you're paired with a dragon, you can hear each other's thoughts, so you guys can communicate. You get a magical power based on what your dragon can do. And she doesn't think that she's gonna make it that far, but she's really gonna try. So you have her doing that. Then you also, on the reverse, have this guy in this camp who's named Xaden Ryerson, who is her mortal enemy, but due to circumstances, they end up having to kind of work together and figure it out. So it's pretty chunky for a fantasy, but like I was hooked almost right away. And I get the hype. I totally get the hype. So I'm excited to see what the second one is about. I feel like it's not going to be as good as the first one, just because I felt like the first one was so good, but we had a huge cliffhanger. Also, pretty sure there's going to be like 5 books in this story, or in this series at this point. Little terrified of that, not going to lie. So this one I loved. It took me heart and soul. Like I said, I had it on my Kindle, and for some reason, reading on my Kindle is the hardest thing for me to do in the process of like getting through a book quickly. I can read physically pretty quickly, audiobook obviously pretty quickly, but for some reason when I have a Kindle book, it always takes me so long. I took this book with me on my Kindle to the beach and read it. I think we weren't even there a week, and I read it in like a few days. I was obsessed with this series. I could not stop reading it. So yeah, I get it. I get the hype. I'm sure many of you have this on your list as well, but this one comes in at number 3 for me. My light is going, so I'm trying to get through these. But coming in at number 2 is The Ranger by Monica McCarty, which is my one and only kind of like historical romance that's on this list. I talked about this in my disappointments and favorites video of the year. It is the 3rd in the Highland Guard series, and when I tell you this took over my soul, I still know details about this story, and I read it in, I want to say it was March, because we were trying to do 1 book a month in this series, and then we both hit slumps. I buddy read this with my friend Taylor. We both hit slumps this year, so that didn't work out so well, so hopefully we'll pick it back up again at some point, but this one is still my favorite in the series. We've read about halfway, I think, so we've gone at least 6 books in. And my favorite. I will not stop raving about it. So this series, I'm sure I've talked about it a bunch, but if you need a refresher, this series basically follows 12 guys who are part of the Highland Guard, which is the secret guard by Robert the Bruce, who is basically like trying to take back Scotland for the Scottish people, from Edward, who is the ruler in England, who thinks he's got claims over Scotland. That's all actually like history. That's like a real thing. And there were rumors of a Highland Guard, but no proof. And so this author basically took those rumors and made a book series about it. And so each book in the series follows someone in this secret guard, and this one follows the guy who's known as the Ranger, but his name is Arthur. Because he's known as the Ranger because he has razor sharp senses and the ability to like blend into the shadows. So this book really is him and this woman that he fell in love with previously, but he knows that he is not the right one for her, so he can't have her, and she really wants him, and it's a whole thing. He sent a spy on her father because her father is a supporter of England. So you've got some spying going on. You've got him fighting his feelings for her. There's a lot going on, but just their relationship is so pure, and I loved every second of it. And it's just kind of like the story of watching him like fight for literally fight his feelings for her, because he's afraid of, like, he knows he can't act on them, but she really, really is pushing him because she really likes him. So there's a lot going on here, but I just, there's a lot more to the story, but I just loved it, and I still think so incredibly highly of this. Like, when I made this list, I was like, yeah, this one has to be on it, and it has to be really high on this list. All right, coming in, number 1. I feel like this is not a surprise. Now this one does kind of step in as the second in the series, and it kind of steps in for the second and third book in this series, because those are both pretty even for me, but I think I like this one just the tiniest bit more. Did you guess it? Are you ready? Kingdom of the Cursed by Carrie Maniscalco, which is the second book in the Kingdom of the Wicked series. So Kingdom of the Cursed and Kingdom of the Feared, which is the second two books, are pretty even in my mind as far as which one I enjoyed, but I think I enjoyed this one just the tiniest bit more, but they're so even, I'm honestly not even 100% sure. So this one is a new series that I discovered in the summer. Read Kingdom of the Wicked just randomly. It was for Ashley from A Frolic Through Fiction's Patreon buddy read one month. Picked it up, thought literally nothing of it when I started it. Took over my life, and I said, oh my god, I need answers. And so I went and I immediately read the second one, and then I read the third one almost immediately after. Not quite, I was waiting for the audiobook to come through, but I read it pretty soon afterwards. And I do not binge series. I know it was just a trilogy, so it wasn't too long, but I am not one who binges series unless it's specifically for a video. So the fact that I did this voluntarily because I was so invested, I feel like is very telling. I don't know what it was, but these characters just like took over my soul. And I have not stopped raving about it. It's one of my favorite series of all time now. So the fact that this is number one, I feel like should not be a surprise because I literally have not been able to stop talking about this series. The characters are amazing. I still go back, like I tabbed the crap out of it. I still go back and reread sections because I just love scenes between our main two characters. Just like one of the other books that I mentioned, the From Blood and Ash book, the main characters share their emotions and love via fighting. Not like physical weapon fighting like it is in the From Blood and Ash series, but like they have verbal sparring matches, and also like the sarcasm, like the way these two interact with each other. I love them. I love everything about them. So yeah, this one was one that just consumed me for like a month and a half, and I have not been able to stop thinking about it. I went out and I bought all of the editions because I wanted them. I kind of want special editions of them, I'm not gonna lie, but I'm happy with my paperback ones for now, and I love it. I will not stop raving about it. I will not stop recommending it. It's definitely for people who like that fun, smutty fantasy romance vibe with a super morally gray main character and like a main love interest. Like, there was a lot to the series, especially in the second and third book. We learn a lot about this world. There's a lot of secrets that have been hidden for a while, but the first one starts off with a murder mystery, and then it kind of doesn't continue murder mystery wise, so there is a little bit of a voice and shift within the series, so I could understand people who loved the first one not wanting to continue. This one definitely is new adult, so it switches real fast from YA to new adult, but as the main male character, Wrath, is one of my favorite. He's up there with Rhysand from ACOTAR. Like, I love him. He is amazing. I will never stop raving about him. I think I don't have it for the second book. I bought like fancy picture inserts for the first book. Like, you know, those overlays that they put in books because they're beautiful. I have a problem. Loved this. Favorite book of the year. I feel like we shouldn't be shocked. And that's it. I'm so sorry my light kind of went away as we were going through it, but those are my top 10 books from the year. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know, as always, if you've read any of the books that I mentioned. Were you surprised by some of the ones that were on this list? Was there a book that I have talked about that you think should have been on this list? What is your favorite books from the year? Let me know all of the things down below. And of course, I just wanted to say a quick thank you for you guys for being here for this year, 2023. This will be my last video of the year. So I hope you guys have had a wonderful Christmas or holiday season, whatever you celebrate. And I hope you guys have a fantastic new year. And I will see you guys in 2024. If you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so go check all that out, and I'll see you guys in my next video, or next year in 2024. Bye!